There are moments in history when a single sentence changes everything, when power meets its match not through force, but through unshakable authority earned in silence. This is the story of such a moment, one that happened 30,000 feet above the Atlantic when a retired three-star general spoke exactly 7 words, and 2 F-16 fighter jets broke formation mid-flight. If you love stories where quiet dignity defeats loud arrogance, hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next will restore your faith in respect.
The year was 2003. Commercial Flight 447 from Washington to London carried 217 passengers. Most were businessmen, tourists, families. Seated in 12C was Colonel, now General, James Ironside Matheson, though nobody on that plane knew it. He wore a simple gray suit, his silver hair was neatly trimmed, his weathered hands held a paperback novel. To the flight attendants, he was just another elderly passenger who asked politely for coffee and said thank you with genuine warmth. In first class, 3 rows ahead, sat Bradley Thorne, executive, self-made millionaire, loud voice, louder opinions. He'd been drinking since takeoff, his laughter cutting through the cabin like broken glass. When the turbulence hit over the Atlantic, he didn't just complain, he erupted. "This is unacceptable," Thorne's voice boomed as the seatbelt sign illuminated. "I paid $15,000 for this ticket. Get me the pilot, now!" "I don't care about weather." Thorne stood, swaying, his face red with alcohol and rage. "I have a meeting in London worth $50 million. Tell that incompetent fool flying this plane to get above this turbulence or find another route." The lead flight attendant, Sarah, approached with practiced calm. "Sir, we're experiencing unexpected weather." The captain. The cabin fell silent. 200 passengers watched. Sarah's professional smile never wavered, but her eyes showed the exhaustion of fighting this battle alone. That's when it happened. General Matheson closed his book. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate. He walked down the aisle not rushed, not aggressive, just the measured pace of a man who had commanded 10,000 soldiers and never once raised his voice to do it. He stopped beside Thorne's seat. The general looked at Thorne with eyes that had seen combat in 3 wars, eyes that had made decisions affecting nations. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried through the cabin like thunder rolling across a distant mountain. "Sit down, son. You're frightening the children." 7 words. That's all it took. Thorne spun around, ready to unleash his fury on this elderly stranger who dared interrupt his tantrum. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the general's posture, straight as an iron rod despite his 72 years. Perhaps it was the way every other passenger had instinctively gone silent, sensing they were witnessing something profound. Or perhaps it was the look in Matheson's eyes, not angry, not threatening, just absolutely certain. "Do you know who I am?" Thorne sputtered, his weapon of choice. "I know exactly what you are," Matheson replied, his voice still quiet. "Now sit down before you make this worse for yourself." Drop a comment below if you've ever witnessed someone get humbled by pure presence. We want to hear your stories. The plane hit another pocket of turbulence. Thorne stumbled backward into his seat. But it wasn't the turbulence that made him collapse. It was the weight of facing someone whose authority didn't come from money or volume, but from decades of earning respect, one decision at a time. Matheson returned to his seat, opened his book, continued reading as if nothing had happened. But something had happened.
Sarah approached the general's seat 20 minutes later, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "He's been terrorizing us since boarding." "That man needs to learn something," Matheson said without looking up from his page. "Power you have to scream about isn't power at all. It's just noise." What happened next became legend in aviation circles. When Flight 447 landed at Heathrow, two officials were waiting at the gate. Not for Matheson, for Thorne. The pilot, Captain Rebecca Chen, had radioed ahead. Thorne's behavior had escalated after the general sat down, and he'd made threats against the flight crew. British authorities escorted him off the plane. But here's what the passengers didn't know. Captain Chen had been moments away from declaring an in-flight emergency. Thorne's aggressive behavior, combined with his intoxication, had put the entire aircraft at risk. She'd been preparing to request fighter escort, a procedure that would have diverted the flight, delayed 200 people, and cost the airline hundreds of thousands of dollars. One retired general, speaking 7 quiet words, had prevented all of it. 3 days later, back in the United States, Matheson received a call from an old friend, Admiral Catherine Price, now serving at the Pentagon. "Jim," she said, laughing, "you made the International Incident Report." Flight crew, British Aviation Authority, and our embassy all filed paperwork. You know what the pilot wrote? "Civilian passenger diffused critical situation with greater efficiency than any protocol. Recommend commendation." Matheson chuckled. "I just asked a drunk man to sit down, Katie." "No," the Admiral corrected, her voice turning serious. "You reminded 200 people what leadership actually looks like. The Flight Attendants Union is talking about that moment in training sessions now. They're calling it the Matheson Standard, handling crisis with dignity instead of dominance." The story spread, not through social media, this was 2003, but through the old network, the way important stories always traveled in military and aviation circles. Flight attendants shared it, pilots discussed it. It became part of the unofficial curriculum. When you've earned real authority, you never need to raise your voice. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. 10 years later, at a ceremony honoring veterans at Andrews Air Force Base, a young Air Force captain approached General Matheson. She introduced herself as Sarah's daughter. "My mother told me about that flight," the captain said. "She said she'd been thinking about quitting. 5 years of dealing with passengers who treated her like a servant had broken her spirit. But watching you that day, watching how you commanded respect without demanding it," she said, "it reminded her what strength really means. She stayed with the airline another 15 years, retired as a senior instructor." Matheson smiled, the same quiet smile he'd worn on that flight. "Your mother was already strong," he said. "She just needed to see that strength doesn't always roar." The captain hesitated, then asked the question everyone who heard the story eventually asked. "General Sir, what would you have done if he hadn't sat down?" Matheson's eyes twinkled with something between wisdom and mischief. "Captain, in 43 years of military service, I learned one fundamental truth. Men who make the most noise are usually the least dangerous. Truly powerful people don't need to prove it. They just need to be." He paused, then added, "But I also learned this. When you speak with certainty, earned through decades of doing the hard right thing instead of the easy wrong thing, people listen. Not because they fear you, because somewhere deep down they recognize truth when they hear it." The general's words became an unofficial motto in certain military training programs. Officers would quote him, "Strength doesn't always roar." Flight schools used the incident as a case study in crisis management. And somewhere in the archives of commercial aviation, Flight 447 remains a footnote about the day a 72-year-old man in a gray suit prevented an international incident with 7 quiet words. Today, General Matheson is 93 years old. He still flies commercial, still sits in economy class, still says please and thank you to every flight attendant. And if you're lucky enough to sit near him, you might hear him tell the young soldiers who occasionally recognize him, "The greatest weapon you'll ever carry isn't on your hip or in your holster. It's the respect you earn by treating every human being with dignity, from the 4-star general to the person serving you coffee at 30,000 feet. Because true authority whispers while pretenders scream. And sometimes the most powerful military response is a grandfather quietly asking a bully to sit down so the children won't be afraid." Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories from Tales of Courage.